been involved in a lot of holly Ilex opaca restoration projects as well. And at the nursery, we grow between 15,000 and 20,000 Ilex opaca every year. So we ship these out, we propagate these from our own stock. We ship these out every spring all up and down the East Coast, from Florida to Connecticut, west to Texas. I do propagate other native holly species, Ilex decidua, Ilex glabra, Ilex verticillata. And just this year, Heritage Seedlings, which is a very renowned, infamous, very well-regarded wholesale nursery in Oregon, has started placing Ilex opaca orders with me as well. So we do ship to Oregon now too. So you'll see all that in the presentation. Good grief, I can't see this. Oh, there we go. And then I'm very proud to say that we achieved the status of a holly certified holly arboretum with the Holly Society of America, and we did fulfill all that criteria that is requested, and I'm leading up to the fact that we grow our own cutting wood, which is so important in propagation. The first step in propagation is having access to good, healthy cutting wood. And if you can grow it yourself, or you know who's growing it for you, and you know their methods of growing it, that is really 75% of putting good roots on cuttings. And so we grow most of our own cutting wood. We do get cutting wood in, specifically from Jim. He's been very, very generous in supplying me and my nursery with cutting wood over the years, and we have kind of worked together. He supplies the cutting wood, I put the roots on them, I will send them back to him, he'll grow them on. I think it's his water. Look at the growth on these over here, and this is just 1 year. But anyway, he'll grow them on, and then he'll either bring them here as test hollies, or he'll ship them out as test hollies. But more importantly, to get some of these new registrations and new introductions out into the trade, I will put roots on them and harden them off and take them in what we call liner flats to the Mats show. And the Mats show is the Mid-Atlantic Nursery Trade Show. It is the largest wholesale nursery trade show in the country, and wholesale nurseries from all over the country either display their plants and their wares there, or they come to visit and buy for their own nurseries. And it's not just nurseries that attend the Mats show. It is anyone who is associated with the horticulture trade. So it can be parks people, garden centers, environmental organizations, other nurseries, plant societies. Anyone who is associated with the nursery trade can come to Mats. So I can't stress how important the Mid-Atlantic Nursery Trade Show is to plant groups like this one. Okay, so I just had to put this picture in here. This is Ilex opaca sundown. This is an example of one of my latest introductions that we've been propagating like crazy, just trying to keep up with demand. I put together packets of information so people can see them at Mats for new holly registrations. If you have a new holly that you're considering registering, and if you have sufficient cutting wood, I'd be happy to root them for you and try to promote it at Mats. And we don't charge for this either. I've taken a lot of Jim's selections, that I feel the trade would consider worthy of being in production. I've taken some of Bill Coole's selections. It takes a while for other wholesale growers to trust propagators when they recommend something, because you don't want the wholesale grower thinking, oh, well, she's just got hundreds of these hollies and she's looking to unload them somewhere. You really have to take time in establishing a relationship with them and getting them to trust you and believe you when you say, this holly, it really is of merit, it's going to do fantastic for you, you need to try this. So a recent example of this would be a wholesale nursery. I've known the owner for almost 40 years. They're located in McMinnville, Tennessee, and he is starting to buy hollies from me, and he's going to buy some Orangey Pretty, he's buying Baltimore Blaze, he's buying Sundown, he's buying Forest Totem, and he's buying Boiler Boy. And these are all of my recommendations. So, and I take my recommendations very seriously. I have to know how the holly is going to perform. I have to know that they're strong rooters. I have to know that it is a reliable selection before I recommend it to a customer. And this is how growers and propagators like me, wholesale propagators, get things out into the trade. It is not an easy thing to do. So this is just another shot of the holly collection at Heartwood, the holly orchard, as you first come into the driveway. And you'll get a chance to see all this next year in person. Those of you that have been there before will find that the holly trees have tripled in size since the last time you were there. This is another view from the middle of the holly orchard. We have a section where we planted different winter berries, and whenever I plant hollies out in the arboretum, I have a few goals in mind. The first goal usually is to plant out for cutting wood or for seed sources. So we do, all of these winter berries are labeled. We do collect seed off of these. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, if we can beat the birds to them. So this is just another view here. We have other evergreen hollies that people have given to me over the years that are planted out in this section. And some of you may remember my white cats. So we don't put any kind of poison down for the rodents or anything. We have a strong cat population. People say, aren't you afraid they'll get the birds? Well, if they're well fed, you know, sometimes they'll get a bird or two, but they don't purposefully go after the birds. They really keep the rodent population down, so it helps. So we're going to begin with propagation in the propagation house. I also do a lot of propagating for the National Park Service. I propagate old historic and witness trees for the National Park Service. Sometimes they request that their employees come up to the nursery for a training day just to learn the different steps of propagation, to better acquaint them and give them a better appreciation of the plants that they're working with. So this is a Park Service employee who came up for a training day, and she is mixing propagation media to fill the flats that we stick the cuttings in. So the propagation media that I like to use is pretty simple. They're all different kinds of recipes. I tell my students at the college where I teach that over the years, if they decide to go into any type of propagation, they have to do what works for them. And it all depends on the particular crop that they are propagating. For the hollies and for most of what I propagate, 50% peat moss and 50% medium grade perlite works the best for me, especially for the hollies. They need the acidity of the peat moss, and they need that particular size of micropores in the propagation media for adequate drainage, so that as the cuttings are being misted, water does not collect around the bottom stem of the cutting. It flows through at a very nice rate. It doesn't get super saturated. It stays moist so that when you take your hand and feel it, you can make a clump out of it, but it's not super soggy, it's not super saturated. So this really does work for us, and we mix this by hand. Everything we do is by hand. The only automated piece of equipment we have in the nursery is the intermittent mist controller box. And when the power goes out, we're misting by hand. We'll take the generator hose and we'll use that to mist or water by hand. We do have a generator now that comes back on in case the power goes out for a long period of time. But also when the well gets low, we have 3 wells on the property. This year was a horrible year as far as the drought and the intense heat. It was just a year unlike any other, probably the worst year that I've had since I've been in business. With the heat, it would reach, sometimes it would reach 130 degrees in the propagation house. And despite methods of cooling and trying to keep the cuttings cool, you know, I'm not going to say they struggled this year. They didn't necessarily struggle, but you could tell that this was kind of an off year. It didn't seem to affect the timing of rooting, but they did just kind of sit there for a while after they were cut. We usually start the cutting process in July. And we did start in mid-July this year. The cutting wood was at the perfect stage to start cutting then. So it was a little bit earlier. But they just kind of sat there for a while like, you really want us to root now? We're just so stressed out, we're hot. And they did, and they're looking better now. But it was a very challenging year as far as propagation goes, especially for rooting softwood cuttings like Ilex verticillata. But at any rate, getting back to the propagation media, we mix bins and bins of this several times a year. Right now they're filling the flat package that we stick the cuttings in, and it's this particular package is in a 10-inch by 20-inch flat or tray, and it holds 50 2¼ by 2-inch peat pots. And the reason I use this particular package is because they ship very well. The roots do not circle around the peat pot. They penetrate the peat pot very early because the mist keeps the peat pots wet. So the roots have no problem whatsoever penetrating the sides or the bottoms of those peat pots. A lot of people like to propagate, wholesale growers like to propagate in small plastic pots, but I find if the cuttings sit in those pots for too long, you do get what is called flashing, and the roots will circle around and around and around the insides of the pots. So we in peat pots. Okay, this is a close-up of the propagation media. Often after it's watered, and we do go back and forth over the top of it with the hose to get it adequately moist before we stick the cuttings, because We don't ever want to stick woody cuttings into a dry mix. For one thing, they're just gonna fall over. For another thing, you want them, as soon as you take a cutting from a plant, it starts desiccating. It starts losing water immediately. And you want that plant to start reabsorbing water. You want that cutting to start reabsorbing water as soon as you cut it. So we like to have the medium nice and wet. Okay, so these are examples of good wood that we like to use for cutting. I remember last year at a meeting, someone in this group said that they had a hard time getting a central leader on a holly, on American holly in a container. I am here to tell you, and I don't mean to brag, but I have no problem getting a central leader on American holly in a container. The reason I don't have any trouble is because we always cut terminal shoots. We never cut lateral shoots unless we are really desperate for wood. Say we have a plant that has very, very little cutting wood on it, or it's a one-of-a-kind plant, then we may use these small lateral branches. They may start off growing very weakly at first, but they could develop into something, and you can just kind of be rest assured that you're trying to save that particular selection or that particular cultivar. But this is the part that we like to use right here, the terminal part. Now sometimes these terminal cuttings will get extra long. I've seen them grow 2 feet in a year. And yes, we can get 3 or 4 cuttings out of them, and they will always shoot up another terminal at this node here. So, and I am very fortunate in the fact that Jim grows great cutting wood, and I have great cutting wood in my field and in my arboretum, and I also have other friends that bring me great cutting wood. And when I describe to them how to take the cuttings, they almost always will send me nice terminal cutting wood here. So another thing that is really important when you do any kind of propagation, whether you're propagating for yourself, whether you're propagating commercially, is a good pair of clippers. I always instruct my students to use bypass clippers, and that's what these are right here. It's where the one blade bypasses the bottom blade. You never want to use what I call crushers. Those are the type of clippers where the blades meet in the middle. They just do not perform a quick, clean cut. And we also wound. We scrape off the epidermis of this part of the cutting right here, right over a node. And these clippers work very well for that technique also. So this is an example of good cutting wood, of the best type of clippers, in my opinion, to use to make your cuttings. And this is the bench. The striations you see on the black weed cloth here, that is the biotherm. That is the bottom heat that these benches have. And the biotherm is slender black tubing where hot water courses through the tubing, and there's a mile of it on this bench that just kind of weaves back and forth all throughout the top of the bench. And it goes out to the boiler that I have in the garage, where the water is heated, and the water is recirculated. So the water is heated to a temperature of 120 degrees, and as it's recirculated, upon return, the water only loses half a degree in temperature. So it's a very efficient system. And then there's a thermostat under the bench that controls the temperature of that bottom heat, which is very crucial if you start rooting cuttings in October. You must have bottom heat to keep them going through the winter.
So in this.
Well, we're getting, I've got
You're getting to
pictures
that?
right
Sorry.
here. Yeah, so this is an example. I get excited when I see good wood like this. So this is what we do, just thousands and thousands of. The reason we propagate so many cuttings is because wholesale growers most of the time are large growers. Wholesale growers have nurseries that are 500, 600, 700, 1,000 acres. They do not want to line out, in some cases, any less than 500 plants at a time. That is why you have to develop a good relationship with them. That is why you have to be confident and assured in recommending a good holly to them, because you don't want them to get mad at you for recommending some holly that isn't going to perform for them, because they want to make money off of these hollies. And it is not worth it to them to plan out 25 of this or 25 of that. And in some cases, it's not even worth it to them to try 100 of this or 100 of that. They'll say, give me 500, give me 1,000. If they like what they've purchased in the past, they will always come back to you and say, I want 2,000, I want 3,000. Well, then we have to be a little bit careful, because Boiler Boy is only one plant. And now, you know, people want Boiler Boy, but hopefully people that have been getting Ilex opaca Boiler Boy in the past, they're planting them out, and they will have their own wood available to them as well. But this is an example of a really nice, healthy cutting right here. So where we make the cut, and it's a little hard to see on this, but we always make the cut at a 1/4 inch below the node. So this is the part that gets stuck into the propagation media, and that cut is always made at an angle, always. The textbook that I use for my students in the class that I teach, when I teach holly propagation in my class, the textbook always says it doesn't matter how you take the cutting. You can take it flush or straight across. I don't think he says too much about taking it at an angle, but I have found through years of experience that taking cuttings at angles for woody plants is always better, because water does not collect around a stem that has been cut straight or cut flush. And you really want that, you want this to absorb water, you want it, you don't want it to dry out, but you don't ever want water sitting around it either. So the cutting is made always at a 1/4 inch below the node at an angle, and then we scrape this epidermis off. It's called wounding. It's like peeling a carrot or peeling a potato, and we just scrape that off. This is only about a 1/4 inch here. I enlarged this so you could all see it. A 1/4 inch above the node on both sides like this.
Do you cut through the node, or?
No, we do not cut through the node. We cut over the node.
What do you mean by over?
So you have the node of the plant.
Want some light?
Yeah, if you want to get the light bulb. You may be able to see it better here. So this is an example of good, healthy cutting wood here. This is the node right here, and the reason we want to scrape this part off of the node is because there is a certain type of tissue around the node called meristematic tissue. So that tissue has the capability of becoming roots or another leaf. And when prompted with hormone, it stimulates that tissue right in this area to grow into roots, and that's where the rooting comes from. So by wounding this over the node like this, it allows better absorption of the hormone, and we use liquid hormone for this. So this is at an angle at 1/4 inch below the node here, and then this wound is a little high, but we just kind of wound it over the node. We don't gouge into it and go through the node. Now this is an example of cutting wood from a very old tree. So this is actually the Indian steppes holly. Some of you may remember that holly. It's supposedly 350-year-old tree. I don't think it's that old. I think it's more like, I don't know, maybe 200 or 250 years old possibly. But every year I try to root cuttings from that tree, and it does root surprisingly very well. Older holly trees, if you can get some cutting wood off of them, they do root surprisingly well. So I just took this picture as an example so you can see the difference between older cutting wood and newer cutting wood. Now this cutting may take a little longer to grow on, but again, it usually roots okay.
Can you use a powdered hormone?
So in the class that I teach, we do use the powder. Now, usually I teach in the springtime, which is not the optimum time to do holly cuttings. So I try to take in things where the students are going to see fast results, like we root dormant elderberry canes, we germinate catalpa seed because they germinate pretty quickly, they grow pretty fast, and I want my students to be able to follow something through from February through mid-June, just so they can report on the different stages of germination and growth. But surprisingly, the holly cuttings that we've taken, because I want them to see the technique that is involved in the procedure with holly cuttings, we have taken some of the powdered hormone and mixed it with water like a paste, and they've used that, and we've gotten limited percentages on that. But I tell them it's not your fault, it's just the wrong time of year, you know. But I just want them to see the procedure.
Going back to that previous photo, where would you make the cuttings on that?
This one?
No, one before that.
So this is the prepared cutting.
Before that, the one that has the sitting on the bench.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This one?
That one, yeah, where were the cuttings?
Right here,
You would do it right there?
right there.
Everything else is thrown out?
No, I could get 2 out of this. If I wanted to, I could get 3.
Okay.
And that's kind of why I have this, because I was going to show you, but we can't see the slides and see this at the same time. But I could show you after
Got
this
that 5 minutes.
presentation. What's that?
Got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
We can go longer.
We can
Yeah.
go longer.
So lateral
I could
branches,
get
you would
3
discard
cuttings
it,
out of
right?
I would not use these shoots right here,
Right,
unless I were desperate for wood.
okay.
Question for you.
Yes.
Sometimes you get, I forget what the term is, but you get like a gall that develops a random tissue, you know, where you're hoping to get roots.
Yeah,
Do
it's a big callus.
yes, a callus, thank you. Do
Yeah.
you scrape that off and
You can
re-treat
scrape
this?
that off, you can re-wound the plant, or you can cut it off entirely and go up to the next node and then try to do the cutting that way. But yes, you can try to scrape that off. Some things will root if you scrape that callus off. That comes from either not enough, it can come from not enough hormone, or it can come from too much hormone as well.
But it's not your friend, is what I'm hearing.
It is not your friend.
Okay.
You just wound one side, you never wound
No, we
two
wound
sides?
both sides.
Both sides? okay.
Yes.
And you
So this is just an example of an older cutting from the Indian Steppes holly too, close up. And this again, here, this is, now this is the top of the cutting, but I turned it so you could see the picture. So this is an example of a cutting, say that this is the cutting and I were going to get 2 cuttings out of this. This would be the top. So you would always cut at an angle 1/4 inch above the node for the cutting, and then to make the cutting that you're going to stick into the propagation media, it's at an angle 1/4 inch below the node, and then you just wound over that node on both sides. And there's the Indian Steppes holly. So this is a big old holly. This is in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. This used to be the national champion holly. This is a male. I think it's the second place champion holly now. There is a bigger one, but this, people are always interested in saving and preserving older genotypes. So this is, I usually get phone calls from people, you know, who have a plant that's important to them, or is a witness plant or a heritage plant, and I propagate them. So this is a picture of the actual process here, preparing and sticking the cuttings. We never stick the cuttings too deep. That can be detrimental to the cutting also. You only want to stick the cuttings to just above where the cutting was wounded. And so you can see how we're wounding right over the node here. Taking that epidermis off. This is what it looks like here. Cutting gets dipped into liquid hormone, and then it just gets stuck just above the wound here. Oops. And mist is very crucial, especially in years like this year. So usually the mist is set to come on every 5 to 6 minutes for a duration of 8 seconds for the first week. Then I usually turn it off at night because I don't want the hollies getting super saturated at night. And they do tend to caliper up and root better when they dry out at night. The mist gets turned back on in the morning, and then it will be turned back off at night. So as they progress in the stages of rooting, that mist will be weaned back. So it won't come on as often, and it won't come on for as long of a duration. And this is root initiation at about 3.5 weeks. Here's the callus cow that you were talking about, except this one is developing roots here. This is the callus, and this is the initial roots that are starting to develop. So this is Ilex Helen Corbett. We had someone, I think Rachel, you remember that story, you referred that person to me.
Yep.
She had a particular holly that was special to her and asked me to do cuttings of it, and we wrote a story about it. It was a really great story of her parents, I think, that had the original house near Philadelphia, and her dad had this big holly tree, and she was getting ready to sell the house and wanted to preserve this holly, so she sent me cuttings of it, and I propagated it for her, and we put an article in the newsletter, and it was just really nice. And then she came back and and purchased some of the hollies and gave them to all her family members, so we like to perpetuate things like that. And interestingly enough, too, sometimes I can just look at an opaca most of the time and tell which ones are going to root better. And I do find that hollies that tend to have darker green leaves root better and root with better percentages. They also root faster. I find that yellowberry hollies root faster and with greater percentages as well. And most of the male opacas tend to root very, very well with better percentages than some female selections. Usually with female selections like Cedar Hill and Miss Helen, I get about, with Cedar Hill probably 95%, with Miss Helen probably 90%. With the males, the yellowberries, Dan Fenton, always 100%. Every one of those hollies roots. Boiler Boy is darker, the leaves are darker green, it's a male. 100% that plant roots, percentage-wise. It's a fast rooter and a very reliable grower.
The cuttings have berries in them, is it better to remove the berries or?
We always remove the berries, yes. This is the temperature sensor for the soil. We usually turn the heat on at the end of October. We turn it off usually, hopefully the end of March, because by then my bank account is, you know, scratching the bottom of the barrel, and we want to transition these hollies off the bench and get them shipped out and or outside, transition them up to their next level of production and their next level of care. So with bottom heat, usually with the crops that we stick in July or August, I can get roots on them in 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, and they do not require bottom heat at all. It's the hollies that get stuck around the end of September that will require bottom heat at some point in their production for them to be able to make it through the winter. And that bottom heat can fluctuate from 70 degrees to 50 degrees, depending upon the stage of the cutting crop.
Do you use any solar?
No, it's too unreliable.
You keep them at that bottom heat
No,
when you do the later cuttings?
yes, when we do
Because I
the
heard
later cutting.
120 degrees in July.
What's that?
I heard something about the 120 degrees.
That was overhead temperature. That was air temperature.
That was temperature, not water. So the water's always around 70, 50 to 70, depending on.
Yeah, but the
time of year.
water's for the heat. We don't turn the
Yeah,
heat
that's
on
true.
until, if the heat runs from the end of October through March. And the temperature can be adjusted. The heat is not, the water temperature is 120 degrees. The temperature of the heat is not 120 degrees. It can be adjusted. The heat can.
Is that soil temperature or air temperature?
Soil
Water
temperature.
Soil temperature.
The water temperature for the heat is 120 degrees. But the heat temperature itself is not 120 degrees. The heat can be adjusted for the water. So this is Ilex opaca Boiler Boy at about 3.5 months old. Rooted cutting. And I mentioned we stick other species. This is Ilex glabra. We can pretty much do Ilex glabra cuttings year round. They tend to do better in August and September, but I've done them in every single month of the year, and they root. The males take a little bit longer. This is Ilex verticillata, and deciduous holly propagation is completely different than evergreen holly propagation. These cuttings, there's a very small window of opportunity for softwood cutting propagation of hollies. In our area, it usually falls somewhere around the 1st of June to the 2nd or 3rd week of June. You have to get it then. If you wait too long, you're only gonna get like 35%. Usually with Ilex verticillata, if all propagation conditions are met, we usually get about 85%, which is pretty good for verticillata. They tend to wilt as soon as you take them. It doesn't matter if it's a shady day, doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day. The percentage of shade, I have 25% shade in the greenhouse, but they require more. So we invert flats and crates over the tops of the trays just to provide them with more shade. And we just hover over these things because as soon as you cut them, they will fall over like lettuce. They'll wilt like lettuce. They need constant misting and constant water on them to perk back up. And only when they have perked back up can you safely say you're out of the danger zone. But then if you start giving them too much water, the inner leaves will start to turn brown, they'll start dropping off. So you really have to know when to give them shade, when to cut back on the shade, when to give them more water and then cut back on that water. So this is probably the best crop we've ever had. It takes a lot of time to get good percentages on Ilex verticillata. So when we do Ilex verticillata from seed, we look for good selections. This is Mary Jo, a selection that I made years ago from the wild. This is winter gold in the snow. Now previously we would collect berries and stratify them, go to great lengths to clean them and stratify them in the refrigerator. I decided one year we were just wasting time with that, so we decided to let them stratify themselves the first year on the plants. And we like them to go through a few cold periods, a few cold days, couple of freezing nights before the birds get them, and then we start collecting them. We start putting them in big buckets like this. At this point, we can cover the buckets and put them in a cold garage, not the refrigerator. It's too damp and humid in there. They tend to get moldy in the refrigerator. And then in about January, we'll start cleaning them. And like I say, we do everything by hand. We kind of push them through this screen to work the pulp off. They go through a strainer. They go through this metal bowl here, and we do what we can to separate the pulp from the seed, and then they just get strained, and then they go through this step several times until we've gotten all the pulp off and the seed is fairly clean. Then the seed gets sown into big 5-gallon buckets. They don't get buried, they just get lightly covered, no more, no deeper than the depth of the seed. I cover all my seed with sand because it acts as an aggregate. It keeps self-bodied insects away. We cover the pots with a fine wire mesh screen to keep rodents out, and then we sit all the pots outside. And Ilex verticillata is a 2-year seed. This method has always worked for me. In 2 years, we have just thousands of seedlings that come up. And I sell a lot of my plants wholesale to groups that do reforestation, and they never want named selections, even though named selections are the straight species, especially with hollies most of the time. But when I say we have straight species winterberry for sale that were propagated from seed, I can't keep them in stock. And then, okay, so these are the seed kind of fermenting, getting that pulp softened. Sometimes though, the birds beat us to it, and we let the birds clean the seed. So this is all, last year, the birds just stripped a lot of the winterberry. They went and roosted in the tall fastigiate maples, and they expelled all the seed onto the weed cloth before, and I sent one of the employees that works for me out there with a big broom. We swept up buckets of seed that had already passed through the bird's gut. We just rinsed the pulp off, and we saved ourselves a lot of time and a lot of steps, and we had clean seed already.
Going backwards.
I guess that was it. Okay, that was the last slide. Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I did. We sent you some, volunteer orange cuttings last fall.
Yes.
Did those turn out all right?
They rooted, but they struggled.
Did they?
The wood was not, it wasn't very heavy. You took those off the original tree, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so the wood
From
was,
University of Tennessee Arboretum.
yeah, so the wood was a little light, and it didn't, from the cutting wood, I don't think the tree had a lot of moisture up in it. So they rooted okay. We did pot them up this summer. They're in quartz now. So hopefully they'll be stimulated enough. We put a little bit of starter fertilizer on them, and hopefully they'll grow a little bit better. But they did struggle in the greenhouse.
I know, they were dry as well. when
They
you
were
got them, I
very
think.
dry.
Yes.
But at least they didn't drop their leaves, so
Good.
that was a good thing.
Yeah, there's a
Chris.
story behind those. Harold Elmore was propagating them. He was gonna sell them at the University of Tennessee football games. Volunteer orange.
That's kind of, yeah. Chris?
Just to review, the evergreens anytime after June through end of October.
Volunteer orange.
No, June is too early. So in your area, I would say end of July in
End
your
of July
area.
Through October for the
Yes.
evergreen. And
Yes.
what's the difference between if you do them in July versus October?
Well,
Hard
if you do
water?
them in July, you can usually get roots on them so that you don't want to let them freeze over the winter, but they don't need bottom heat. So usually you can get roots on them if you start early.
And the average is 3.5 months to root them?
No,
How long?
I would say 8 weeks, eight to 10 weeks.
And then the verticillata the first 2 weeks in June?
Yes. Yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Hale.
Is there a difference in timing between the rooting the Asian species and rooting alpaca?
No. Not in my opinion.
Okay.
It's the same time.
Second question. I've found that I have to be very careful with peat.
With what?
Peat moss.
Oh,
You know, as a media, and a lot of, prepackaged media has a lot of that in it, because in the heat and moisture, if you don't watch it, it will compact down and block off air circulation, even if you mix perlite with it. So when do you shift up to, from the rooted cutting stage to, a different soil mix?
no sooner than 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
most of the time it's around 10 or 11 months.
So what is the actual mix for the cuttings to stick into?
50% peat moss and 50% perlite. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wonder, do you notice the difference between the rotting percentage difference between July and October?
No,
No, they're good.
no.
And the second question is, you have a bird eat the seed. Is this a bird poop or just a bird eat it?
The bird eats the seed and then they poop it out.
Okay, it's bird poop you
Yeah.
collected.
So
Yeah.
it comes from
Yeah.
fertilizer.
Well, we rinse them off before we sow them.
It's not just me.
We don't want it to breed any kind of fungus or anything like that. Oh, and incidentally, I don't spray anything. We don't spray pesticides, we don't use herbicides, we don't use any kind of pre-emergence, we spray nothing. We are organic. I mean, we use the chemical fertilizer. Pennsylvania does not have a nutrient management plan. I'm inspected by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture once a year. I pass with flying colors every year. My inspector tells me I have the cleanest nursery he's ever seen. And it's because we let a lot of our, I have a big 5-acre pollinator meadow in the middle of my nursery. We let a lot of the native grasses and different species grow up in different areas around the nursery. We've got tons of bird activity. We have a lot of bat activity at night. We have tons of owls. We have a good, sustainable, wildlife population.
Can you compost that pulp left over from the berries?
Everything gets thrown on the compost pile, and occasionally we'll see random seedlings popping up here and there, wherever.
So
Yeah.
when you're collecting the underneath the trees, the bird group with all this, you get everything in there, right?
What's that?
I mean, you get winter berries, but you also get opacas.
No, in this case, it was just winterberry,
And how's it just winter berries?
because we saw them. We saw them eating the winterberries
Okay.
and
So
flying up and,
So you're timing it when the.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Cause I was gonna say, if you're just picking up
plus
random stuff.
we watch the seed germinate. It doesn't happen every year, but,
And then that's just an open species then when you're gathering that seed.
yeah. I can't, as a propagator, I can't pass it up. I can't let it sit there. I have to sweep it up and try to grow something.
That's really organic.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the peat moss, is Canadian peat moss okay, or?